Hey everybody, it's Brad Pollina with Bergstein, Flynn, Knowlton, and Pollina, and today I'm here with Eric Butler. Eric Butler is a vice president of sales at Acrisure, New York, insurance agency. He specializes in the construction and real estate fields, and he has done so for almost 3 decades. We work with Eric a lot in the access agreement space. We've done prior videos on access agreements. Just in brief, access agreements come into play when you're performing work on a property, usually in New York City because of the close proximity of buildings. And for whatever reason, you need physical access to a neighboring property, whether it's to perform some aspect of your work, your development project, or very often to actually protect the adjoining property pursuant to the New York City Building Code. Hey, Eric, how's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me on, Brad.
Pleasure. So, as I mentioned, we've obviously spoken a lot to you in the context of negotiating access agreements and related litigation, which comes up when the parties can't agree. There's a statutory procedure under RPAPL 881 to actually compel a license to the adjoining property. And I think you being a sort of a construction insurance specialist and looking at some of the issues that we frequently face with clients in the access agreement space, we wanted to get your thoughts on some of the most important insurance related issues that arise when you're negotiating access agreements. So that's probably something we could talk about for hours. But if in a few minutes or less, could you kind of tell us from your perspective, having worked in this space for a very long time, what are the key insurance issues that come up when dealing with access agreements?
Sure. Well, in working with you, as we've had to overcome numerous times, the first issue that's generally going to arise is that people need to understand and get their expectations in line of how this is actually going to work. So you have the owner who's going to be performing construction um, via the access agreement itself. They're going to indemnify the neighbor, and they're usually going to have to bring their contractor along. And that's where things start to stumble, because you can understand from the neighbor's perspective, they're not the one that got to vet and select the GC. They're going to turn to their trusted legal team, who may or may not have full experience and expertise in how this is going to get done and what's going to happen. And you and I have spoke numerous times that the first thing that needs to be understood, particularly by the neighbor, is what does it mean to be an additional insured? The educated mind would know, that has studied this topic, but to the general public, a lot of times they say, well, what if something happens to my building? Or what if, I have someone who alleges they got hurt? And that really is the crux of what people need to understand, is that if there's bodily injury to a third party and or damage to an owner's property, they don't need to be an additional insured in order to seek indemnity from the owner and or their GC or whoever had caused that. What we're really talking about with being an additional insured is there's a third party who is making a complaint against the owner of that property, saying, hey, I had my property damaged the next building over, or I slipped and fell because of this resulting from the construction. That's what being an additional insured really would entail, that there's
So
some other party that is now starting action against me because of your construction next door.
So if I that's very helpful. And if I think about the kinds of questions that clients ask us when we're dealing with access agreements, representing we have a fair split representing owners, developers, and also the neighboring adjacent property owners. People ask questions all the time and often think that being an additional insured is kind of the first and last word on insurance, indemnity, and things like that. So if my understanding is correct, and what I'm hearing from you today is correct, there's sort of two buckets. One bucket, and this is a question we get a lot when we're representing adjacent property owners, is, well, fine, I'm going to let the developer come onto my property and do some sort of protective work. They're going to put scaffolding up, or they're going to do some sort of digging. They're going to put window protection, netting, roof protection. people say, well, what if that damages my property? What if these guys are there and they're hammering nails and they're putting scaffolding up and they break a window or something? My understanding is that doesn't have that has little or nothing to do with being an additional insured. That's actually a first party, I guess, a first party property damage claim. I see you nodding your head. Is that's correct?
Bingo. And that's really the first party, third party is what people need to understand. You and I have also discussed and had to explain to others, when we have a first party claim, right, we have first party insurance, our insurance. As the party, we're the neighbor. We
You say
have
our
damage.
insurance, you're talking about homeowners insurance, or you're talking about some other type of
I'm
insurance?
talking about if you're the neighbor, you have a property insurance policy. That's going to cover your building. And I can immediately hear them say, hey, wait, I shouldn't have to take a claim because this guy damaged my building. And this is where the big misconception comes in. People think being an additional insured means they can pick up the phone and say, hey, this was damaged, so get your adjuster out here and pay for my window, my whatever has been damaged. And that's not how it actually works. The way it actually works is that person would contact their own insurance carrier. Their insurance carrier is the one who's going to run out with adjusters. They have the promise to pay if the property's damaged. They will then subrogate back against the owner and the GC. That's
Meaning,
usually handled in the access agreement.
and that's handled in the access agreement based on my experience. Hopefully, I'm doing it correctly thus far. Is when we deal with third party claims, we want to be if we want to protect against third party liability, we want to be additional insureds on the contractor CGL policy. If we
Correct.
want to protect against, I'm going to again from the neighbor's perspective, the adjacent property owner's perspective, I want to hedge against the risk and mitigate the cost of my own property being damaged from the construction happening next door. That goes into the access agreement in the form of, I guess, is it usually indemnity obligations or what? It's not an additional insured obligation like a lot of people. You actually taught me this. It's a common misconception. You're not, you need to take a closer look. You need different language in there. So what do you recommend goes into an access agreement in that respect? Is it an indemnity? Is it something more? Is it a combination of things?
Well, typically, when we're asking, this is going to fall right into place. When we're going to go, let's say I'm the broker for the general contractor. Okay. You've come to me, you've said, Eric, I'm working with a neighbor. He wants to be additional insured. Typically, there's going to be what would be a standard agreement that's going to be between the owner and the contractor with full indemnification that will include the neighbor. So the neighbor is now going to be held harmless, indemnified, and protected as an additional insured from third party claims. Then, in such a situation, because that neighbor is not the customer, what is appropriate to do is to get specific endorsements that would add the neighbor as an additional insured. And typically, that's an endorsement that maybe 2% of the attorneys that I run into are familiar with. It's an additional insured form called the CG 2026, and it is designed to cover other parties. So people that aren't really party and don't have the full three legs of a contract with this contractor are going to be added as an additional insured as someone who is not having work done on their premises, but has an insurable interest in the work being performed because it creates exposure for them,
Right.
basically from the public, their tenants, etc.
So we're talking about we start out by saying we're going to contrast first party, third party, CGL. What does it mean to be additional insured versus property damage? I don't want to lose the forest for the trees here. I'm trying to think of an example of where you could actually have. I'm again a neighboring property owner whose property is being accessed in connection with construction next door. I'm trying to think of how somebody, a third party, might come to actually sue that person. I mean, is it scaffolding up on the neighbor's property and there's a windstorm and a piece breaks off and hits someone in the head on the street, so they sue both owners, the one doing the work and the sort of hapless imposed upon neighbor? Is that a valid scenario? I mean, it seems like,
Absolutely,
yeah.
because if the work's being done at 100 A Avenue and the man is standing in front of 150 and he's struck, you can be sure his team is going to go after 150. A
And
lot of
as
times there'll be, as part of the agreement, that there have to be sidewalk bridges and protection for the pedestrians. The neighbor will often require that. They may require protection if they have a parking lot. And that contractor now must install that, right? He's typically going to subcontract that, but let's not go down that path. But in any event, there are numerous ways where somebody could be injured in front of, behind, adjacent to that neighbor's property. And, his counsel is going to want to throw everybody in
right,
that they can possibly get. So typically it would become apparent over time in court, and they might be let off anyway, that they were not the cause of the claim. But in
sure,
the meanwhile, they're accruing
they're going
either
to
a
get
claim on.
named. They're going to get named. Then again, just to tie it all together, that is a third party claim that falls in the camp of additional insured for the neighbor on a CGL policy, as opposed to uh, issues regarding first party property damage coverage. All
Right.
right. Well, we said we'd keep it to 10 minutes. I think we're a little over the 11-minute mark, so we'll leave it there. Eric, thanks again for coming on, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you very much for having me, Brad.